Men dressed in white flannels, one bowling a leather ball as fast as 90 miles per hour, another spinning it at 60-degree angle off a short run, two others with bat in hand striking the ball and running up and down the center of the ground, even as the ball is chased by another. 30,000 people shouting in the stands. It's cricket, all right, the greatest game on earth. In this part one of our series on this extraordinary game, we will find out its origins and trace its development in the Caribbean, where it's almost like a religion. Cricket, lovely cricket. That's our topic on today's show. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation is up next.
CaribNation Television is sponsored today by ElectroWorld, pages and cellular phone. ElectroWorld has 3 locations in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. Calypso Cuisine invites you to come and savor the taste of the Caribbean. The Calypso Cuisine is located in Tacoma Park, Maryland. The Caribbean Market, the food basket of the Caribbean, located also in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And West Indian Record Mart, where music and culture reign, located in Langley Park, Maryland.
Welcome to CaribNation. I'm David Hinds. Today I'm going to have a ball because we'll be discussing something that is near and dear to my heart. Cricket. Cricket, lovely cricket. I have with me here in the studio someone who is quite knowledgeable on the game, who has written extensively on it, and we will discuss the game, look at its origin, and look at its history as far as the English-speaking Caribbean is concerned. Dr. Maurice Pierre is Professor of Sociology at Morgan State University. Maurice, welcome again to CaribNation.
Good to be here.
Well, in the beginning I said that cricket is the greatest game on earth. Do you agree with me?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's something about cricket that I think is different from any other game. I think, for instance, of the military precision. You have the opening bowlers bowling. You've got the bowler running up to bowl. You've got the players, the fieldsmen at extra cover, at long on, at long off, all marching in unison, actually. You have the ball delivered at tremendous speeds. You've got a batsman who has a blade in his hand, and his desire is to conquer the bowler. So there's a sweetness about it, there's a savagery about it, there's a grace about it, and there's a peculiarity about it.
And unlike many other games, this is a game that spreads, what, 5 days? And I understand that in the old days it used to go longer than that.
Absolutely. Now it lasts 4 or 5 days. I speak with my American friends, and they, of course, are astounded. And I tell them that it was a test, a timeless test. There was one instance, for instance, when England was playing in Australia. There were 9 days left. In those days, one didn't travel by plane, one traveled by boat. And they decided that since there were 9 days left or 10 days left, they'd play the test to the end. They played for 9 days, and it still was not, still was not decided. So, but when one becomes an aficionado of the game, there's a contest between batsman and bowler. If there's a spin bowler, there's flight, for instance, there's turn, there's an attempt to lure the batsman into a false sense of security. The batsman, on the other hand, knows that he has the blade in his hand. He knows that the bowler is attacking him. He knows that he has to defend himself, defend his wicket, but at the same time to conquer psychologically and otherwise, the bowler. Because the crowd is looking on.
Definitely, and let's go back to the beginning, because this game was invented in England.
Absolutely.
And there is a peculiar history to this game of cricket. Talk a little bit about how and the circumstances that gave rise to this game, cricket.
Okay. Well, as I understand, they call them stumps now, and of course they were called wickets, and the British decided, as they did in other circumstances, that when they moved to the colonies, they would bring the game along with them. They brought some other cultural trappings. For instance, they brought botanical gardens, and not an awful lot of work has been done on that. but they brought cricket with them. And cricket was supposed to socialize the masses. It was intended, but particularly a certain stratum in the colonies. It was meant to transmit certain British values, such as hard work, such as industry, such as deferred gratification, such as respect for authority. The umpire was always right, hence the term is not cricket. If one showed any kind of displeasure with respect to the way in which one was given out, this was considered to be anathema to the interests of the game. And in that way, those cultural underpinnings, the cultural underbelly of colonialism was manifested in terms of cricket. What you also found is that initially the masses were involved only as spectators. The game was played in the top schools in the West Indies. Queen's College in British Guyana, as it then was, Lodge, Combermere, and Harrison College in Barbados. Queen's Royal College in Trinidad, JC, Jamaica College in Jamaica. So it was played among the top layers of the society.
So the game was really class. The whole question of class was an integral part of the game. Let's go back to England, where it all started. Around what time? What time did they first played cricket in England?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. There are different kinds of views about that, but I think it actually started late in the 19th century. This is my understanding, late in the 19th century. And initially, some of the masses were involved in it, in the sense they were allowed to play, but not at the top, the top levels of the game. There were taverns, there were pubs there, and the tavern keepers and the innkeepers also would have an 11 on Saturdays and Sundays. And in that way, the game actually flourished. From that, obviously, it moved, and this is how you got county cricket eventually. But the top players, the top people in the society at the Cambridge University and Oxford and so on, were in fact playing the game at another level.
But you mentioned at the beginning that this game, cricket, was meant to do more than just engage people in game playing.
Oh, absolutely.
It was part of the whole civilizing project and process of the colonialists. In fact, in England, they would talk about the 3 C's: cricket, Christianity, and the classics.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, of course, as I said before, the game was played at Oxford and Cambridge, and the British, as the colonial masters, were very much interested in making sure that their control was in their hegemony was in fact maintained. And as you said before, the classics, cricket and Christianity. The classics obviously was important because one learned about the history of Britain, you learned about the glory and the might of the British Empire. Christianity has always been very, very critical, even during the days of slavery. It was extremely critical. It was meant to have, as you said before, a civilizing influence on the slaves, and perhaps most importantly, it was meant to make them more accepting of their servitude. Cricket, as we said before, was more subtle. It was more subtle. It was supposed to be a game. It was supposed to be played. But as I said before, nonetheless, the cultural aspects, the cultural hegemony, was very much resident in the whole game of cricket. Again, as I intimated earlier, the game was played on the sugar estates. You had the managers playing there, the members of the plantocracy would play there. And this incidentally lent itself to some kind of an acknowledgement of the presence of the game among the lower stratum. So they were expected, for instance, the estate foreman and his gang were expected to get the field ready so that the estate managers could play. They were expected, for instance, to get the ball, to get the bats and so on and so forth, to make sure that everything was okay. So initially, interestingly enough, the masses were peeping. They were not allowed to participate, they were peeping. Thirdly, the class structure manifested itself in terms of the clubs. I mentioned the top schools, I mentioned the sugar estates, and thirdly, there were the clubs. There was Queen's Park Oval in Trinidad. And there was Kensington Oval in Barbados. There was the Georgetown Cricket Club. And as you know, this was one of the bastions of white and later on Portuguese supremacy. As a matter of fact, for a long time, no black Guyanese was allowed to play. I remember for GCC. I remember that John Trim, who was a pace bowler who played a couple of matches for the West Indies. That's right. He eventually played, I think, as a professional. But the game in those days was dominated by the White family. And when I say the White, I don't mean W-H-I-T-E, I mean W-I-G-H-T.
Yes, right.
The White family.
C.V. White
that's
and
right.
so forth.
Absolutely. And they, of course...
And we had the Grants in Trinidad.
That's right, Ralph Grant and so on. And of course in Barbados you had the Goddards and so on, the Tarletons and so on. And they're all connected, as I said before, with the top schools. So at that point in time, the game was meant blacks bowled, blacks fielded, blacks got the ball and so on, and the whites batted.
But hold a minute there, Maurice, because now what? We are the end of the 20th century, and the game cricket was dominated by the Caribbean team, made up mostly of the sons of slaves, ex-slaves and indentured servants. But at the beginning, they were not allowed to play the game. Let's now trace this development. Representative cricket started and Test cricket started, the West Indies started playing Test cricket in 1928. What was it like? What did the team look like?
Well, the team had a number of, the whites, as I said before, were the captains, the vice captains, the manager, you know, they were all white. And there were a number of local players, but they were mostly bowlers. Among the Old Cans, for instance, the father of Larry Constantine.
Right.
And they, as a matter of fact, there were some others who came from Barbados and so on. And I remember reading in an English newspaper, when they landed there, they were seen as something of a spectacle. Something of a spectacle. Of course, you had the white captain leading his black chargers. You know, that was one thing. But I remember one reporter saying somehow he felt that one of these days, these guys were going to play the game seriously. These guys were going to excel. You know, this was kind of seen even, you know, even at that point in time. And of course, we didn't do very well.
Right. Between 1928 and 1950, we can call that the apprenticeship period. Tell us what happened during that period. Of course, there was the great George Headley. There was Larry Constantine that you talked about, Ormond Griffith, Manny Martindale. Talk a little bit about what happened during that period, because it's crucial in understanding what happened later on.
Well, George Headley was a Jamaican, and he was clearly the star at that point in time. As a matter of fact, his batting average is the highest among West Indian cricketers.
Averaging about 60.
Yeah, averaging about 60.
And second only to Don Bradman.
Yes.
Right.
As a matter of fact, he was called the Black Bradman. I suppose some people would probably feel it was probably better to refer to Bradman as the white
Headley. That's what CLR James said.
Exactly. Because Headley had no support, almost no support actually. And he went in there, he took the bowlers apart, he did what he had to do, and his batting his performances were absolutely tremendous. It didn't matter what team or what wicket. You know, he was the batsman, you know, par excellence. We had the dynamic play of Martindale, Manny Martindale. You had George John subsequently played. As a matter of fact, CLR James described him as furioso, as a black furioso. And of course, you had Larry Constantine, very agile. His figures did, in a sense, belied his capabilities, his test figures. But he also played, as you know, league cricket, and there he shone. Now, there was a break during the war. There was a break during the war. Intercolonial cricket was played. And this was kind of unfortunate because during that point in time, a number of cricketers really blossomed. John Goddard, for instance, was at his best. Jeffrey Stallmeyer was at his best. Berkeley Gaskin was at his best. Robert Christiani was at his best. So a number of players, you know, did extremely well, you know, during that period of time. But of course, the war came, and they were not able to go to England. There was no Test cricket. Then in 1947, they decided to resuscitate the cricket, and the British sent a team that was a second-class team, as it were, a second-string team. The only player, I think, of international caliber at the time was Len Hutton.
Right.
And he came down.
He came late.
That's right. He came late. Yes, he came late. And the West Indies, England won the series, but the West Indies showed some promise. In the interim, we left, of course, 1950 came, and John Goddard led the team, and the team at that time comprised some aging players. The three W's had begun now to play cricket, and they had begun to do an awful, to do very well.
The three W's are Everton Weekes, Sir Frank Worrell, and Sir Clyde Walcott. Well, Sir Everton Weekes,
absolutely,
Knighted, yes.
Absolutely. And there, of course, were Walcott went to Harrison College, and Worrell went to Cabamere, but Weekes did not have that, that kind of a background. And Robert Christiani was in the team, as was Jerry Gomez, as was Pryor Jones, and so on. And most importantly, the spin twins, Ramadan and Valentine. This was interesting because Ramadan was discovered in a village. He was turning a small coconut underground. And somebody saw him and said, wait a minute, if he can do this with a small coconut, just imagine what he can do with a ball. And interestingly enough, they, in a sense, began to reshape the whole question of spin bowling. Ramadan's quicker ball was the equivalent of a medium pace bowler, was that of a medium pace bowler. These were not slow spin bowlers. These guys had flight, they had direction and so on, they had spin and so on. So we won that.
Well, before you get off from 1950, because 1950 is really the watershed, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of West Indies cricket. I said at the beginning that cricket, lovely cricket, that came out of that series. Talk about the connection between what happened in 1950 in England and what was happening in the larger West Indian society, so as to give cricket the perspective that we're driving at.
Well, one of the things that happened was that I think it was in the mid-1940s, apparently a group of West Indian intellectuals and future political leaders met in England. I think Kwame Nkrumah was there, George Padmore, I understand, was there.
1945, Pan-Africanist Congress in Manchester.
Correct.
Right.
C.L.R. James was there and so on. And C.L.R. James subsequently wrote the case for West Indian self-government. And these guys, of course, India got independence in 1947, and they decided that it was time for a similar move to be made in the West Indies. Now, this had already begun. Of course, you had the disturbances in Jamaica in 1938, out of which came the trade union movement, out of which came the BITU, the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, and from that came, of course, the Jamaica Labour Party.
Right.
And then you also had subsequently the National Workers' Union, and then out of that came the People's National Party. In Trinidad, Eric Williams had returned. He returned, as I believe, I think in the late 40s and in the 50s. He had some problems with the West Indian Commission, and he subsequently decided to mobilize the masses. And of course, he euphemized the University of Woodford Square to become the University of Woodford Square. In Guyana, British Guyana it was at the time, Cheddi Jagan returned in 1943, I do believe, with his wife.
Right.
Burnham, subsequently Lyndon Forbes Burnham returned in the late 1940s. And these guys were getting the movement going as far as...
So the independence movement was taking shape in 1950. An assault on colonialism by the masses of the Caribbean.
Absolutely.
And this was happening in the cricket. All of this time, the West Indies cricket team, black people were now playing as bona fide members of the West Indies cricket team. But they were not being made captain, although they were capable of captaining the team. So let's fast forward now to 1960, 1961. C.L.R. James goes back to the Caribbean, becomes part of the federation that was taking shape, and mounted his campaign for a black man to be captain. Take it from there.
Well, subsequently, Worrell became captain. As a matter of fact, Franz Alexander, and this was a bit of a problem because Alexander was vice captain. He went to Australia. And he was, I think he led the team, if I'm not mistaken, during the famous tie match, test that took place there. And there was some agitation, because the feeling was that Frank Worrell was capable of leading the team. This was very, very important because the political independence movement stressed equality. And it was perhaps no surprise that this emphasis on equality, this emphasis on reducing the colonial presence, should spill over within the field of cricket. This is exactly what happened. Frank Worrell subsequently became captain in 1960, and of course this started a whole revolution. As a matter of fact, I was looking at figures before I came, and it's something of a bell curve, actually, in terms of winning games. If you start, for instance, at the bottom, you know, in terms of the win-loss column, it goes right up, starting, it gradually creeps up when World became captain.
Right.
Gradually creeps up, and then it reaches the pinnacle when Lloyd was captain, and to a certain extent Richards, because Richards had a higher win, as a matter of fact, percentage than Lloyd. Richards' percentage, I think, was 54%, and Lloyd was about 48%.
And Richards never lost the Test series.
Exactly.
So we're going ahead.
Yes.
Out of the Worrell Revolution came Garfield Sobers and Rohan Kanai and Conrad Hunt and Hall and Griffith and so forth. And they carried the mantle for the next 10 years. And then we come to 1975, 1976, and something happened that caused another revolution in West Indies cricket, the beginning of the Clive Lloyd era. Talk about that.
Well, what happened there was this. It was kind of interesting. The West Indies went to Australia. They played 6 Test matches. I think it was 75 to
76, just after winning the World Cup,
That's right.
the first World Cup in 1975.
They played 6 test matches. And Australia won 5 out of 6. The West Indies won 1. But this was not the critical factor there. What happened was the Australians rubbed our noses in the dirt. The Australians play hard. They've just come, as you know, they've just played in the West Indies, and one of the players was in fact accused of spitting at a West Indian opener. As a matter of fact, he was fined. They played hard. I understand that under their breaths there were some racial comments that were made. I'm not saying that they're racist. What I'm saying is that they played the game hard.
Right.
See, and Lilly and Thompson, the Australian pace bowlers, blew the West Indies out completely. The West Indies left and went to New Zealand. In New Zealand, when they got there, the place was cold, and they found that the New Zealanders were equally interested in winning by any means necessary. As a matter of fact, Holden in his book speaks of it, in the book Whispering Death. He says that there were, you see, the thing about it is, this is interesting. We learned the game, and our feeling with respect to the game was that if you were out, you didn't wait for the umpire to give you out. You left. The New Zealanders did not do that.
Right.
This got the West Indians very angry, and at one point in time, they had decided to leave the tour.
So after they came back from Australia, and that was 1976.
Clive Lloyd decided.
Clive Lloyd decided, go ahead.
That's right. Clive Lloyd decided 2 things. That had enough of this, and they would in fact take a page, as it were, out of the Australian book. And from this came for the 4-pronged pace attack. That was one thing. The second, and perhaps more important thing that came about, was that the West Indies hired an Australian fitness trainer, and emphasis was placed on fitness.
And for the next 15 years, up until 1995, West Indies dominated the game. The longest dominance of any team sport in the history of human society. What all of this did for the West Indian society?
Well, I can tell you this. I think the West Indian record is the best against England. And it's a special sweetness to be able to beat the person who taught you the game. It's a special feeling when it comes to nationalism, to be able to beat England because England was the mother country. They were supposed to be the masters. What the West Indians did was to remake the game, as it were. We spoke about the 4-pronged pace attack. Rohan Kanai introduced the falling hook, actually. And Kanai is an extraordinary player. He apparently had seen that there were no more mountains to climb. He had already done everything that he had to do, and he decided, well, okay, I'm going to do something else. There's a bit of charisma coming here. You know, people use different platforms, different arenas, okay, in order to send different messages. And he did this in the Oval Test, I believe, in 1963. So that the West Indies dominated the game. But what was important was that in 1962, Trinidad got political independence. In 1962, Jamaica got political independence. In 1966, Barbados and Guyana got political independence. So the feeling of nationalism was extremely critical. It's very, very important. And the team was supported by the crowd, and this was extremely critical. People, as a matter of fact, if we didn't lose, if we lost, I didn't eat for about 2 or 3 days. Don't speak to me. This was the kind of involvement that we had. It is also important to recognize that the game is not necessarily played only in the arena, in the field. For the West Indies, you have about 3 or 4 different concentric circles. You've got the duel between the batsman and the bowler. Then you've got the supporting players, another circle. Then you've got the spectators in the ground. And of course, things are stratified based on class and to a certain extent race. And then you've got those people outside in the trees. And then you've got another circle, okay, at the street corners, discussing the games, in the cake shops, in the rum shops, in the tailor shops, and so on. Very knowledgeable of the game. And in houses. So the game penetrates the very essence of the society. And it moves concentrically right to the sugar estates in these ever-widening circles. You've got, of course, the transistor radio, so people are always au fait with respect to the scores. What is also interesting, however, is that we developed, I think as part of the colonial legacy, an emphasis on excellence. This is extremely important, an emphasis on excellence. I have seen instances where players have been hounded out of the game. It's interesting. You know, if you see the West Indian crowd, if you have dropped the ball or whatever it is, they're harsh on you. Okay? They have no mercy, actually. You may hear crowds, songs like "Bowl the umpire," "Bowl the wicket keeper," or something like that. It means that the bowler is not doing very well. But and this question of excellence, which manifested itself in the top schools, at Queen's College and so on, the Guyana Scholar, the Island Scholarship, also penetrated the game of cricket. So you have the combination of the fact of nationalism, the fact that we were left out of the game, the emphasis on excellence, the feeling that it is very sweet to be able to beat England. All of these factors conspired to produce a winning team, a winning ethos.
And of course, cricket is the place where all the races meet, all the classes meet, the working class comes into contact with the upper class, and of course all the islands and mainland countries of the Caribbean meeting there on the cricket field. Maurice and Pierre, it's been a pleasure having you here. We can go on to talk about this forever and forever.
Absolutely.
We'll have to have you back to do a wrap-up because this is just part one of our series on cricket. Well, cricket is more than just a game. It's art, it's culture, it's passion, it's life. As CLR James says, it goes beyond the boundary. Be sure to join us next week when we continue our series with conversations with some of the West Indies' great cricketers. Until the next time, this is David Hines thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Carib Nation. And remember, as always, our motto here on this program is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation. And also remember to rally round the West Indies.